because it's super satiation. And it's a non-trivial technological problem. It's now possible for young men to look at more beautiful nude women in one day than any man has ever seen, prior to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, than any man in history had ever seen. That's not nothing. That's something. And to think that doesn't do anything to you, it's like, no, that likely does something to you.
Say are things that men need to be focusing in on when it's trying to select a woman for a long-term marriage partner?
Well, you want someone honest. That's really, really important. Someone who will do her best to tell the truth. And my wife swore she'd do that before we got married, and she has. Probably better than I have. And so that's a rock, man, at the bottom of things, So and you can't underplay the role of sexual attraction. And that's a mysterious thing. And so that's crucial as far as I'm concerned, and can't be
so
just,
I have a real question about that, Jordan Peterson, Dr. Peterson. So you mentioned pornography, and we do countless pieces of content to be able to help young men overcome that issue and provide tons of resources to help them support them. So what I've noticed that happens sometimes is because of years of watching pornography, the men's sexual attraction becomes warped. And so how can a man whose sexual attraction to women has become warped to the extreme ends due to so much consumption of pornography, how can that man go back to now being attracted to, more natural looking women, or more women that could be around their lives instead of the projected?
Well, deprivation is helpful.
Yeah.
So I think it's reasonable to assume that there's a novelty edge in pornography, like there is in so many quasi-addictive phenomena. And so it has to become, because novelty is a sexual kick, it has to stay novel, and that means that over time it's going to become more extreme. So that's not good. Well, so how do you resensitize yourself in some sense? Well, you stop. And then hopefully you recover. And then you deprive yourself of that outlet, let's say. And you might say, well, is that absolutely necessary? And maybe there's nothing wrong with pornography. It's like, well, I don't know, man. Like, have you ever really met a guy who is proud of that? Like, you know what I mean? That makes him feel like, I'm the guy, man. I'm watching pornography and getting off. It's like, what a man. I don't believe anyone feels that. And to me, maybe I'm wrong. And to me, that's an indication that, yeah, we know. No, it's pretty cheap. It's cheap. It's easy. And, I say that knowing that I believe the research evidence shows that if you introduce pornography into a community, that rates of sexual crime committed by men upon women actually decline. So there is perhaps some utility in the outlet. But, that's a unidimensional analysis and doesn't take into account all the other effects of pornography. So, including the ones you described. And I think that those are real. It makes sense that they're real, because it's super satiation. And it's a non-trivial technological problem. It's now possible for young men to look at more beautiful nude women in one day than any man has ever seen, prior to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, than any man in history had ever seen. That's not nothing. That's something. And to think that doesn't do anything to you, it's like, no, that likely does something to you. So don't substitute the false for the real. And don't underestimate the utility of deprivation. What do we need to drive us forward to have the adventure of our life? Well, some deprivation, that's for sure. That heightens desire and drive. And maybe you need that. You're afraid to approach a woman. Well, you remove part of your drive with pornography. And so now you don't have that sexual urge to overcome that anxiety. And so you stay timid for your entire life. Maybe not, but maybe.
So with 12 rules for life and also with Beyond Order, you've amassed so many amazing rules that I just think it's just so phenomenal. One of my favorites is Rule 4 and 12 Rules for Life. Don't compare yourself to others. Where others are today, compare yourself to who you were yesterday. And so in your opinion, obviously, there's so many rules that are great, but what do you think is probably, if somebody was to read those books and there's one rule that you're like, this rule out of the 24 I've given you over these past few years, you can absolutely not get this one wrong, which rule would that be?
Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Because you can't tell the truth, right? Because who are you to tell the truth? That's a mighty tall order, man. But you can stop saying things that you know are lies, and that will change your life if you do that. And it's crucial.
Why would it change their life?
Well, how can you adapt to reality when you falsify it? And you think, well, I'm just lying to other people. No, you're not. You can't just lie to other people, because what you say becomes you, especially if you practice it, because we build ourselves out of words. And that can be lies in action too. It's like, don't say things you know to be false. That's a good start, man. And it allies yourself with the truth. And how can that be a bad idea? Imagine that what is true reflects reality, which is sort of the definition of true. How can failing to align yourself with reality work? How is that possibly going to work? Well, you say, well, I can, if I lie, I get away with something. It's like, no, you don't. I tell you, I swear this is true. In all of my clinical practice, I have never, ever seen anyone ever get away with anything even once. You think the chickens won't come home to roost. It's like, all that means is you're too stupid to see what your lies caused, or too blind or too self-deceptive. You just don't see it. And so you don't get away with anything. Nothing. It's terrifying to actually understand that. It's terrifying. What if you can't get away with anything, ever? Well, that's the judgmental God, fundamentally. That's a very old idea, and it's an old idea for a reason. And of course you can't get away with anything, because imagine that you took a flexible plastic comb, and you bent it backwards, and you say, well, I got away with that. It's like, well, what's going to happen when you let go? It's going to snap back and hit you in the face, and that's life, man. You warp the structure of reality? You think you are someone who can warp the structure of reality with your words and get away with it? Really? No, man, that should terrify you right to the core of your soul. You're not God. You can't do that.
Dr. Peterson, you said that you've never seen someone get away with lying. What do you mean by that? Because I can imagine there's somebody listening to this right now who said, well, I haven't told the truth, and I got away with plenty of things in my past. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, everything is right in your life. Everything is just the way you want it to be. That's how it is it? Yeah, sure. And good. If find someone like that, great. But I've never seen anyone like that. And psychopaths, they have no conscience. They lie all the time. Well, how do they get away with it? They don't. They have to move, because people figure out who they are, and then they have to move on. And so you could say, well, that's getting away with it. It's like, well, no long-term relationships, no love, no trust, no brotherly affection, no friends, and generally no financial success, not in the real sense. How is that getting away with it? And then you might say, well, I've got away with it so far. It's like, maybe you have, and maybe you're just too dim to see the consequences because you've blinded yourself, and God only knows who you could have been if you wouldn't have lied your way to where you are now. No, I've never seen it. And sometimes I'd work with someone to untangle what had happened to them over multiple years as things fell apart. And we'd find all sorts of lies. Not always ones they told, but sometimes lies their parents told them, for example, that deep, dark, terrible things, messing things up in an unbelievably catastrophic and tragic way. Now, it was absolutely terrifying. But I can't see how it just doesn't make sense. It's like, how could you possibly defend the idea that you could warp the structure of reality and get away with it? I mean, like I said, who do you think you are? Reality is, you don't mess with it. Like, it kills you, and it'll torture you quite a lot before doing that if you're particularly unlucky. So beware. You know, they say the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. That's that judgmental God. It's like, you violate your conscience, man, you will pay. That's hell.
Yeah. No, that's really powerful, and I love the metaphysical representation that you talk about throughout your books, because I think that's something really big in today's world, where a lot of individuals, you know, there's a fear of societal consequences, and they don't speak the truth, and they lie.
Yeah.
But their spirit and their souls is being torn apart on the inside, and though they appear to be getting away with it, when they sleep at night, they just know that they're not being their authentic selves, and they know they're living a lie.
Yeah, well, and they get weaker as you become what you practice, you know. And if you withdraw and lie, you become a lying coward. That's what happens. You don't have to practice that much before that's the case. So is that what you want? You know, well, no one will come after me. It's, yes, they will. Part of it is also really understanding in some way that there's no escape. You know, there's no safe path. There's a noble path. There's an honorable path. There's no safe path. And possibly you wouldn't want that anyways, because, well, who are you exactly, you know? Look at you, you know, warrior stock. Every single one of your ancestors has stayed alive for 3.5 billion years. It's like, good work, man. That's a lot. And so, what makes you so sure you're built for safety? What makes you so sure that that's what we should strive for? And then if you want adventure, I'll tell you what an adventure is. You tell the truth as nearly as you can, and you'll have the adventure of your life. That's for sure. So, you know, and that isn't trying to fit in because you're naive, or, you know, because you're too afraid to lie. That doesn't make you telling the truth if you're too afraid to lie. That's, you know, in a cowardly sort of way. There's a wise way of being too afraid to lie. So, and I thought too, you know, when I looked into atrocity deeply, and I looked into it for 15 years, meditated on the human capacity for atrocity, it was pretty awful. It was awful, you know, reading those stories of what happened in the Nazi concentration camps and what happened in, well, everywhere. And then trying to think about what you'd have to be like to do that, and then thinking it through. It's awful. And it was doing that, I realized all that was tangled up with lies. And so that's part of this issue of male power. You know, how do you keep male power noble and virtuous? With the truth. It's lies that turn competence into tyranny. So don't lie unless you want to be an incompetent tyrant. And you think that's easier. It's like, in some ways, I suppose, it's easier because you can slide into that. But existentially, it's hell. And hell has this weird quality because it feels like it's eternal.